In this video, produced by the Master of Arts in Teaching 2021 cohort and facilitated by teacher candidate Madison Mahoney, the students discuss their ideas about cultural responsive pedagogy in relation to their current experiences as student teachers during a pandemic and in K-12 Maine public schools. The MAT program adheres to Maine College of Art's diversity statement and compact, whereby MAT art educators develop the tools they will need to cultivate an environment that prepares their own future students to thrive in a diverse and global world, to recognize that diversity is integral to the academic experience, and to strive to foster an inclusive culture defined by respect, equity, and social responsibility. Our teacher candidates recognize that they are an all-white cohort. They acknowledge that there is an urgent need to diversify the teacher pipeline and workforce through examining institutional policy and barriers, and by making the entire system of schooling a more inclusive experience for all.
The topic of this week's meeting is equity in art education, and also how to be an anti-racist art teacher. So before we dive into our entry ticket, I wanted to just say two things. It is Resilience Week. I want to acknowledge quickly that we are an all-white cohort, and we're talking about these issues of racism, inequality, equity, and that should just be acknowledged, that we don't necessarily know what other individuals are going through, so we shouldn't pretend like we do. But I do think it is equally as important that we do talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, then things go unsaid. So yeah, let's dive in. I think a great next step is also prompted by our group chat. Equality is the state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. Whereas equity, which is what we're talking about, is the quality of being fair and impartial. I think that's a really kind of important thing to understand.
So I know that the entry ticket is something that sort of like stuck out to you, and there are so many different things. So I'll just touch upon a couple quick. In the anti-racist art teachers website, I think that the terminology part is so important. And I remember seeing that last semester when we were talking about the same subject, but that just always sticks out to me every time. And I think that it should just be like a poster in everybody's classroom, because it's just so important. And then I just wanted to talk about my example that I sent in the group chat. I'm not sure if everybody read it. The font was extremely small and stressful, but the teacher gave each student a Band-Aid. And they started by, where do you need to have the Band-Aid, to one student. And the student says, I have a scratch on my finger, so I need the Band-Aid there. So the teacher proceeds to go and give every student a Band-Aid on their finger, disregarding where they had their scratch. So now every student has a Band-Aid on their finger, and that's what equality is. So then the teacher says, I'm going to give every student a Band-Aid where they need the Band-Aid. So now the one student who needs it on their finger has it there, the one student who needs it on their forehead has it there, and then that's equity. And I just thought that was such a good example that every teacher could do for their classroom, just to even just start off the year just with those vibes.
I loved that. I'd never seen that before. And I also love the example that Philippa dropped in. Those are both, I think I've been using equality and equity kind of interchangeably. And now I realize that it's important to know the difference. So I love that. Thanks for sharing. Audrey.
Yeah, I really liked the article, how to better support your marginalized students. I thought they made a really great point of the fact is that new students enter the classroom and they can immediately tell based on their inputs of whether it's a safe space or not. And there's a lot that we can do in those first moments of entering a new classroom to make our marginalized students feel better and safe.
I guess it's just been an interesting experience with equity in such are in a more privileged community. What I mean by that is that, so I'm teaching virtually with a group of students in middle school, and they are to receive an art kit about once a month, all provided by the school. They just have to come to the lobby and pick it up. And then our art lessons are based on the materials in that art kit. And it has been a consistent struggle to get students to remember where their art kit is and to pull out the materials for each lesson on time. And it's hard because students are moving from one place to the next. They're not always, like, where they have their class one week is not always going to be the same place they'll be the following week. My mentor teacher and I have been talking about how to work through that as a means of providing equity to all students. So on our end, that's a lot of modification. So if a student doesn't have the oil pastels where they are when the lesson is due, we have to come up with alternative ways for them to use colored pencils, or things like that. And I think that seeing it as an opportunity to see how students can create work and with different materials has been really inspiring, because it opens up your mind as a teacher to the possibilities of difference in instruction. So yeah, I think for me, changing the conversation from, oh, this is more work that I need to do, to something of a personal challenge to incorporate into my repertoire of teaching tools, that's been really interesting and empowering, I guess, too.
I teach kindergarten and first grade. And for me, the first step, I think, is being aware of your own personal biases, and really the first step in creating a culturally inclusive classroom is understanding that your students will have different perspectives and are coming from different backgrounds, and will all have unique sort of frameworks and foundations to their experience that may change how even small interactions take place. And the way I do this in my classroom, where a lot of the kids are very young and not quite sure how to articulate or even perceive their cultural differences quite yet. But it's always important to give students a potential voice, and also respect that some students won't want to go into their personal cultural experiences. So I try my best to just always be as understanding and compassionate as possible, given there are so many circumstances that these students are coming from.
The cultural competence of the teacher or the adults in the room correlate heavily to the achievement that the students can reach. It's important to acknowledge and understand that we are not perfect. We as teachers do not know everything, and we often learn more from our students than we're actually teaching them. Being a culturally responsive teacher boils down to how we engage the students and what we are teaching them. This includes representing different cultures in how we decorate the room. During holidays, explaining that Christmas is not the only winter holiday, and that there are so many different religions around the world that celebrate the winter season differently. It can be as simple as showing new artists that are underrepresented in my PowerPoints as the art teacher, and showing the significance of what this pattern means in this culture, or what this technique means to this culture. It's important for the students to know that there are voices around the world saying so many different things, and that we can learn from each and every one. It is important to explain to the students that not only is it okay to be different, but that we should celebrate our differences, and that each culture has something relevant and important to share with the rest of us. While doing this, you are creating a safe space for all students of all cultures to feel like they are heard and that they are respected and represented. Students, especially at this young age that I'm teaching, are vulnerable because they are like sponges that retain all the knowledge that we're giving them. If we're not introducing different cultures at this level, then they're lacking such a big part of what education should be providing them.
I was going to say, so the example that I mentioned that I had responded to Lauren's example with, I think Rachel probably doesn't know what this is, but it was a cartoon and some folks might not have seen it. It's a cartoon and it says equality versus equity. And on the equality box, there's 3 kids, people of different heights, all standing trying to look over a fence at a baseball field. And they're standing on the same size crate. But in the equity cartoon, they're different heights and they all have crates stacked up to match their height. So they're all able to look over the fence at the same height. So that everyone has the same, not the same opportunity, but the same ability based on opportunity. And I was just thinking about that. I really liked the example Lauren had sent because I thought that was more of sort of a tangible representation of that same idea for kids. But it also just had me thinking today about the United States and the tenet of us being all men are created equal. And I haven't done research on etymology of the word equal and the differences between equality and equity, but I'm really curious about that because I know as a society we've realized it's not just men, but it makes me wonder are we talking about equality or are we talking about equity? And is that how is that ingrained in our ideals as a society, especially the American dream of building yourself up by your bootstraps? But I was also just going to mention really quickly that last night I was listening to a podcast that I just discovered called, what is it called? I have it up here. Teaching Artist Podcast by Rebecca Potts, which I highly recommend. And she interviews for an hour different teaching artists who they teach in some capacity, whether that's higher ed or kiddos. And they also have an artistic practice of some sort. So a lot of variety, like all of us. And one of the artists she was interviewing, who I can't remember the name of, but that artist was saying that she is sort of interested in doing tab now. And she used to not, and she did project-based art. And she fell into this mindset of wanting all of her students to have something they could bring home that their parents would be proud of and the parents would want to put on the fridge. And then she had this idea of wait, why am I inflicting my aesthetics on these little kids? I want something that they are proud of. So she switched to tab so that they would have more voice and choice in doing that. And I've just been thinking about that since last night of what if we let our students have a voice in what they need? What does that look like, not only from an arts perspective of their artwork and their portfolios, but also in equity? And they might guide us more than we are stuck and pigeonholed in the societal expectation.
Thank you. That was awesome. Absolutely. I want to quickly acknowledge that Cooper dropped in the comments a few of his thoughts. So if y'all want to take a look at that, this last sentence says, employing culturally responsive teaching strategies is a small step towards enacting meaningful change in education. Well said, Coop. I kind of want to jump to our discussion and get into it because I know we have limited time. And I want to shift our discussion this time to, now that we're all starting as teachers, we might have a few different ideas of what equity looks like in a classroom, and how our mentor teachers are doing a good job of this, maybe some more than others, so I want to talk about within our placements right now what we're experiencing in terms of equity. So I want to run through a few of these questions. I'm going to skip the first one because I think we've hit on a little bit on what culturally responsive teaching means. And I think we can kind of keep talking about it. But now that we're 3 weeks into our teaching placements, have your thoughts on equity and inclusivity in the classroom changed? And kind of lumping it in with the next question of how does your mentor teacher model cultural responsiveness? Anyone want to chime in?
I think that I used to think that being like culturally responsive and I think being like anti-racist in the classroom looked like having really well thought through lesson plans that have to do with the disposition of each individual student that's in the class. And I think that that's just like a really, that's just like something I couldn't really grasp, and I didn't really understand why. And now that I've been in the classroom for a few weeks, I found that being culturally responsive is being open-minded and being willing to listen to the students that are in front of you. Sitting in front of the students, communicating with them, and letting that communication be very open. If a student's screaming in the middle of a Zoom call when I'm working remotely, that's just something that that student needs to do in that moment. And as crazy as it sounds, when students are like, "Hey, Matthew, stop screaming," I'm like, "Matthew's not doing anything wrong. Matthew's okay. Like Matthew, what are you thinking?" And then he opens up. And I think that hearing noises or like not understanding what someone's trying to communicate to you doesn't mean that they're in the wrong.
So kind of bouncing off the last part that Seth was saying is like we have a very diverse school, and when the students start talking to each other, they're also teaching each other, allowing students to discuss their culture in a respectful way so others learn, including the teachers. I'm learning so much I never knew before. And also using tools like Google Translate and other translation apps and stuff like that to communicate with students who are ELL, and just being very like open to what the student needs, and don't be just closed-minded and be like, "I'm not going to help you because you can't speak." You work around that, and you try to make everyone feel included and not just one student, and no isolating students.
I came up with an idea to do, because I have all the ELL students together, I thought it might be cool to do some kind of poster, like collaborative project where people, I don't know, decorate like a flag or something, like from where they're from or something about their culture, and put it together. And then I told Jonathan that, and he told the ELL teacher what I was thinking. And she said that that might not be a good idea because a lot of the kids don't want to talk about their culture, and they really don't have positive associations with it. And so it's like, I'm trying to come up with a way to be responsive, and I just don't know what it is like, and it's really stressful.
I appreciate your honesty, and I think like it's refreshing for us. I think we're all going through a level of that feeling, right? And so I think I'm really glad that you shared that with us.
Trent has a very good point in that, like, in theory, it's easy to talk about the stuff, but the practical application, like, it's funny to see how resources are distributed at school, because I have classes where there are ELL students and they don't have assistance, they don't have like an aide, and then classes where there are students who can, have no problem speaking the English language and like do have an aide by their side. And
My kids, they know that this is a safe place. It's a regular thing. If they can make it, I am going to celebrate them being here. They're going to be respected and they are going to be welcomed. And that was like huge for me. Like, okay, I can do that. I love welcoming people. I love doing that. And it might be hard some days because they don't feel great. Like some kids are more like, then, but I can still welcome them and run with that. And I just thought about my own experience as a kid, and I had a lot of privilege, and I'm almost done, I promise. But I like remembered like how many forms I filled out as a kid or like questions I got from adults, and I was like so anxious because I didn't fit the normal boxes. Like they asked me about diseases in my family at the doctors, and I'm like, I'm adopted, I don't know. I like had to ask for like I need a vegetarian lunch because I don't eat meat. And those are so like they are not huge life-changing things most of the time. But even in my little experience of having to deal with that as a child, like looking back, I'm like, wow, these kids have a lot on their plate. And so creating an environment where there's no expectation that's really high is really important to me. And I think you can do that with choice-based lessons where there is like wide open, bring whatever you have. And so that's what I'm thinking about.
In my student teaching placement at an elementary school, I have had the great experience of being able to work with lots of different ELL students. And it's been challenging, but it's also been very enlightening, and it has taught me a lot in a pretty short time. Starting with building lessons for ELL students, it's taught me how to really simplify things, boil things down to really their most basic terms. So I'm not just saying so much that it's overwhelming them. I have to really be very concise with my words. Also providing multiple modes of representation, whether it be having images and doing hands-on demonstrations and gesturing and showing a process in a lot of different ways other than just reading it out loud, reading instructions. But I think the biggest takeaway that I've gotten from working with a lot of ELL students is the importance of social emotional learning and fostering relationships with these students. A lot of times, students that are learning English are really scared to go to school. It's a very intimidating experience for them. They're still undergoing that process of acculturation, and they might still be in that second phase of culture shock where they're just frightened and they kind of shut down in the face of adversity, in the face of feeling anxious or like they don't have any confidence to succeed, and so they just shut down and they disengage completely. You have to be prepared for that to happen, and you have to have alternatives for those students. Maybe this lesson isn't for them, maybe it's a personal preference or they don't understand what's going on, but you just have to have a few things in your back pocket to offer them as an alternative so they're not just sitting there with their head down. But also just being really kind, being very patient, trying to establish friendships with those students, make them feel more comfortable. Even if you can just get them to say a few words a day to you, very basic things, that can be a huge accomplishment.
But I've just been so hung up on making sure that each student has literally everything I could possibly give them. And if that means taking an extra 45 minutes to cut little pieces of saran wrap individually, then I'll do that, because I'm just thinking about equity and the sense of materials also. And in a time like this, I would just rather give more than not. But it's just been so hard because it's so many. And then there's always that guilt of like going to bed like, oh my goodness, did I put that in every bag? But I totally feel that with the materials, and it's hard to, get intricate and get unique with your lessons when you don't know what anybody has. So yeah, I spent a really long time cutting out saran wrap and stuff, but I thought it was better than assuming each student had it at their house. If you want to be culturally responsive and you want to introduce that in your classroom, like you're going to have to, it's going to be some work for you. Like it's not, you're not going to be able to just do that on a fly, but it's just so important, like that, if you're willing to put in that work and if you're willing to do that. And I'm just thinking, I just did a lesson inspired by Alma Thomas, and I had looked at her paintings and I decided like, oh, I'm going to do this lesson. And then I ended up in a wormhole learning about her for like 2.5 hours, just like going deeper and deeper into it. But then I realized I wouldn't actually have been able to teach the students about Alma Thomas if I didn't do that. I would have just been talking about her paintings that I saw on Google for a half of a second. So going deep and like being willing to learn, like, yeah, it's a lot of work, it's stressful, but all we can do is try. And that effort, I think, just means more than we realize. So I guess that's just to everyone. Your effort isn't going to go unnoticed, even if you're feeling like you're running with a refrigerator on your back.
I think we can all relate to that.
Okay, I will make it quick. I was just going to say, I was just reading what Audrey wrote in the group chat, and she writes, one of my favorite moments of this placement was teaching a new student in his first day who only spoke Portuguese and French, how to make a complex double pinch pot figure with only 2 words in French and mostly gestural teaching. He had a blast. And so I think what Lauren was just, and I'm not trying to be critical, Lauren, but what Lauren was just saying about seeing like teaching a culturally responsively as work, I wonder if we can also change that to seeing it more as opportunity, because I think that we're uniquely positioned to be teaching art, which is not a, it's I would say it's a more, in my opinion, inclusive subject, and there's a lot of different ways that it can be accessed by students of, or I guess all people, I guess too. And so I wonder if kind of, riffing off of Audrey and Lauren, like how can you continue to see this as another opportunity within your teaching practice, and recognize that it'll change if it's here in Maine or if it's elsewhere in the States. But there is really exciting opportunity in having that mindset, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I did want to first share about how, okay, this was it, guys. And by the way, so they're 9th grade, and this was like an in-class survey, and I was asked the question of like, what are pronouns? And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think to like talk about this, but it sparked a wonderful discussion, and they were so open to hearing it. And I was like, so surprised. And I was just like, yeah, this is like, the way that we want to respect how other people identify and like make sure everyone feels safe in our classroom. And they're just like, oh, okay. And I was like, cool. Okay. It was like, it was great. That brings us to our last few questions, which kind of sum us up. I want to talk about just the why. So why is this important?
My first thought was that it's really important to discuss these things in school because the students may not be introduced to them besides that. And you never know, you don't know really where anybody comes from and where they go home to. So this may be the only time of their day that they're being introduced to cultural responsiveness and to these just societal things happening in the world. So I think it's just so important to normalize the discussion about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also for my students, we did self-portraits, and I used Kehinde Wiley as an example. And I have, a very like diverse classroom. And I think I just saw a lot of my students perk up when I showed his work, and his work is, just like incredible to begin with. But it was a really cool opportunity just to engage students further who might not usually see themselves represented in art. We are pretty much almost out of time. I want to hand it over to Rachel, but I know this felt like a really quick discussion. It always feels like it gets cut short, but I think it's important to just kind of end on the fact that there's not going to be just one right answer, and we'll keep talking about this and keep helping each other, you know, just day by day become better people and keep trying, as we like to say.
The MAT program is committed to supporting future teachers that will design learning experiences for their students through an equity lens. We are fortunate to teach a subject that honors differences, encourages student voice, and thrives on finding ways to involve the larger community to participate in sharing local knowledge and customs. They will enter the teacher workforce with the goal of and tools to create social change through a culturally responsive approach to teaching. We are so deeply proud of the care and compassion our teacher candidates have for the well-being of their students and for their passion for teaching art as a means of self-expression, creative problem solving, and social change.